The future of all our cities and this country's economy will be influenced by many of the people in this room. That's why we believe that building our cities is one of the most important duties all of us together face and embrace. Cities and how we build them are central to America's economic future and the health of its society. In Kansas City, we believe one of the essential ingredients to this mission is innovation and entrepreneurship. Nurturing and encouraging these entrepreneurs must now be an important part of every city's planning. We are doing that in Kansas City. And one of the young entrepreneurs in whom we have enormous confidence and for whom we offer as much support and nurturing as we possibly can is our next speaker, Jase Wilson. Jase is the CEO of a startup called Neighborly. It's a company that used crowdsourcing, data collection, and a sense of civic pride to allow citizens to come together to raise money for projects that need to get done. Please welcome Jase Wilson, a young man with a company on the move. Jase?
Thank you for being here, especially you out-of-towners. Welcome to Kansas City. We try to play it cool, but we're very thrilled that you're in town, and we hope you enjoy your stay. It's after lunch, and there was barbecue, and I'm very nervous, so if I pass out or anything, you feel free to take a nap, and everything is fine. I won't mind. This is a talk about civic future, but specifically about how to fund it in light of some new economic circumstances that are heading our way. So it's about civic innovation and civic innovators and about exploring new ways to enable those things. I'm going to show you a few civic innovators at first. This is Jason Roberts out of Dallas. Jason is known for having started a grassroots public improvement model called Better Block. And Better Block is a rapid urban revitalization project, one city at a time. And this is a model that's sort of taking off by storm. It's basically just transforming a single block at a time for a day. It's an ephemeral intervention that shows city leaders and citizens what's possible when you invest in the built environment and you do it the right way. Jason, in January of this year, gave a remarkable TED Talk. It's a can't miss if you're into civic things. He did a TEDx talk at OU, and it was so inspiring that it inspired these two women, Kristen and Allison, in Oklahoma City. They're two business owners who hadn't really given much thought to their civic environment, to marshal the resources and the people together to put on a Better Block in Oklahoma City. And together with hundreds of their closest volunteer friends, they transformed this streetscape into this streetscape for a day. And it has had a transformative effect on the city, and it showed what's possible when people are empowered to do these types of interventions. This group of civic innovators based in New Orleans and in San Francisco built a civic engagement platform called Neighborland. It's been an absolutely remarkable tool. It's enabled discussions and it's empowered citizens to have a voice where they might not have before. And what is really fascinating about the Neighborland model, which is basically propose ideas for your neighborhood or someone else's, and other people can support it, and then discuss it and get it done, as the get it done part. They've inspired a movement that has been actually doing the things that they want. So in this case, there's, we want bike lanes along this street. And when the city wasn't listening, the people rallied around and just went out with white duct tape and some plastic signs and did it themselves. And this is Isaac. Isaac is a co-founder of the Free Network Foundation, and they've built an open source kit and plan for any neighborhood to deploy its own distributed wireless mesh network. Basically, in a box, low-cost, high-speed broadband that can be deployed pretty much anywhere in any city. And here's a picture of Isaac on a roof in New York, installing part of the gadgetry. This is called the Freedom Tower. Isaac was arrested in Zuccotti Park for providing internet from his backpack to the occupiers. So besides being awesome, what do these folks have in common? They're all pushing us and enabling us to build better cities. And they're citizens. They're people that, in decades past might have said, well, the government is some other entity, and I'm me, and my environment is how it is, and that's the end of it. But these people are doing things that show otherwise. And they're not alone. They're part of actually a growing movement of civic hackers and makers and doers who together are building the city from the ground up in new ways. And in addition to being awesome, I think they also have the answers that we need to a very serious problem that's facing our cities. That's one that's unfolding as we speak, and that is that cities are going broke. And I think that's been one of the common threads of this conference, is the idea that we're looking at a very different future of funding civic things. So let's look at a couple of aspects of what's going on here. One is the municipal bond market is undergoing some changes, and those changes are being brought about by the realities facing the cities. Cities rely overwhelmingly on municipal bonds to fund things, and bonds have historically been a lucrative or an attractive investment class for two attributes. One, they're tax-free, but the other is they're relatively safe. But in recent years, municipal bond bankruptcies and defaults have increased. So there were a few in 2010, a few more in 2011, and quite a few more in 2012 so far, and that was as of August. So that's one aspect. And it is not going unnoticed by the people that make a living in the bond market and that invest in bonds. According to this article just last Friday, it's starting to stack up. So the future of bonds is uncertain at this point. And there are a number of analysts that say, well, that's where the insurance kicks in, and that's fine, it'll correct itself. But there's one aspect of the bond market worth considering and taking a very serious look at, and it's the percentage of overall long-term issuances that are insured. In 2006, the majority of new issuances were insured, but as of 2011, very few were insured. So even the insurance companies are saying, maybe. And then there's what I feel has been a white elephant in the room in this conference, and that's this idea of what's coming, the fiscal cliff or slope or gradient or whatever we want to call it. Whatever we decide on as a name, the fact remains that billions and billions of dollars of federal money will not be spent next year on cities. There's also a growing intolerance of debt as an idea among generations, and especially among the younger crowds. There are movements like Strike Debt, which aim to abolish public debt, and if we read it, our essential public services are cut because our cities and towns are held hostage. And this is a growing sentiment. So there's an intolerance for debt. And then there's also, you have to add in the ramifications of global climate change, which seem to be very, very real and clear and present. All these things combined, and you've got yourself one hell of a disruptive stew that you need to reconsider. And bad pun not intended, the cheap money ride might be over. It's time to take a serious look at how we fund things, especially those aspects of cities that make the most difference in our quality of life. We need to figure out how to keep those things going. So there's another idea running parallel to the cities going broke, and that's this idea of the do-it-yourself city, as evidenced by, whoa, cool, it's mobile. As evidenced by the folks shown earlier. They are rolling up their sleeves and basically inventing the environment that they want. And that's amazing because if done correctly and supported in the right ways, that could hold the keys to this problem of how we're funding the future of the city. It's a paradox. Even changes that are meant to save money are ultimately costing money in the short run. So where does the money come from? And so that's been a challenging question. I think it's beyond question, though, that local budgets will be impacted by the decline of federal and state budgets moving forward, and combined with the uncertainties of the traditional public finance market. But I do think it's very helpful to remember the city as a public good that's constructed from the forces of private, corporate, and institutional sectors intermingling. And those sectors probably are untapped buckets of cash that, if given the right opportunity and framework and motivation, would gladly deploy capital into civic projects in lieu of taxes. So that's one key, but another key is taking what was a local obligation and transforming it somehow into a global opportunity to be able to give not only the people of the community a burden, but an opportunity that's open to the people, the companies, and the institutions anywhere in the world to invest in the civic projects and the places that they care about. Oh, how? I think one model is crowdfunding, in particular civic crowdfunding. The idea of using the model that Kickstarter has established as a very potent and viable source of funding for creative projects. And we are already seeing that model being applied for civic purposes. Some examples. The Low Line in New York, this is a group of civic makers who have an idea for a new type of park underground, sort of a response to the High Line. And they used Kickstarter, and they asked for $100,000, and they received $155,000 to do a planning phase. It's not the park itself, but that's a start, and that's kind of significant because when you look at the incentives for the people, it's naming this or that, or you get a tote bag. So, you know, the motivation combined with some sweeteners made them get 150%. There's also a crowd-funded community center in Glenelg in the UK. They use Space Hive, who pioneered the idea of civic crowdfunding, to raise part of the money needed to do this community center. There's a crowd-funded bridge in Rotterdam as part of an upcoming expo that's being built one plank at a time, or however many planks are being funded at a time. Very interesting model. There's also, here in Kansas City, Aaron Deacon of Social Media Club looked at how to help fund high-speed, low-cost broadband in low-income communities that might not otherwise be eligible for it. They use civic crowdfunding to raise a bucket of cash to help pay for that on their behalf. And probably the coolest example and the most recent is the founder of the oatmeal.com actually raised $1 million to rehab the Tesla's old laboratory and turn it into a museum. This really happened. So it scales, and it's fascinating, and this is amazing. There's also the idea of corporate sponsorship, ranging from naming rights to other things that companies can do. But this one is worth serious consideration, and it needs to be thought of as a funding source moving forward. If you consider the general revenue of the top 25 cities in 2011, you add the top 25 together, and it's $98 billion, which is on par with what Treasury had as a cash balance at the beginning of November. By the way, if you lose sleep over these types of things, do not look at what that cash balance is as of yesterday. But neither is as much as the cash reserves of a single U.S. corporation, Apple, which in Q3 this year reported $117 billion in cash. And it's not even close to having the biggest coffer of that sort. Corporate sponsorship would take a variety of forms, but I think it can be matched to the needs of the project and the wants of the community. For example, letting a company bid on the rights to advertise along a bus stop in order to pay for enhancements and upkeep. Now, this is a slippery slope, and I think maybe there's a right way and a wrong way. Personally, I would say if we're writing policies around it, then we should put all emergency infrastructure off limits. But if it's done correctly, it is tasteful and it doesn't necessarily have to be in your face. If you haven't seen the logo yet in the photo on your right, then you're not alone, because I didn't see it at first either. Well, there are limitless possibilities for when we approach the DIY city and we figure out new ways to fund it outside of the tax base and outside of bonds. But it's easy to imagine that there are certain types of project that this is probably better suited for. For example, I don't think that we could ever do something like figure out new ways to fund sewers with this type of intervention, because it would be a crappy deal for a company to sponsor that. But you have other types of projects that directly enhance the quality of life and the community and the economy and everything about it, and they also tend to be the projects that are first to go on the chopping block when budgets need to be trimmed. One example is biking and walking infrastructure. So bike lanes and trails and all of the related things that go along with those. Those are well documented and well understood at this point to be a major driver of economic improvement for a community, because a bikeable, walkable community is something that the younger generations prefer. It attracts a high talent workforce, and it is probably by necessity moving forward in the economic reality of the future that biking and walking will be a far greater part of everyone's lives. There's also specific programming for play spaces, recreation, such as a skate park. A skate park, it's cherished by its user base, and it gives kids that, sometimes the kids that use the skate parks, they might not go and do something productive if they didn't have the skate park. But this is a way to help them to build their bodies and their minds in a sound way. But it's also something that's a very special interest. And it's something that's very difficult to fund when your community is, for example, looking at closing down schools because it can't afford that. But what if the skaters themselves had mechanisms and policies in place to make their own? And as we heard yesterday, dogs are becoming a driving force in urban design, and we see all kinds of dog infrastructure coming about that is enhancing quality of life for everyone, even cat owners and people that just don't like animals in the first place. And this is an example. This is a dog run next to the Museum of Natural History in Upper West Side of Manhattan, and it seemed to me that it was, on one hand, a playground for the dogs, but more importantly, I kind of William Whited it and creeped around and took pictures and probably scared some of the dog owners, but it seemed like the more important function was that it served as a functioning social space, a third room of sorts, a third space for the owners. And I also talked to some folks there that said before the dog run, the yard around the museum was a mess. So here's an example of an amenity that's enhancing everyone's life, but it's catering to a specific group. There's also all abilities playgrounds. And it turns out, in the interest of saving money, we've built a lot of our infrastructure for play to cater to, full abilities children. And it costs more to do the all abilities equipment, but it seems like it's the right thing to do for a variety of reasons. So this is something that you could go beyond what has become the baseline if given the right chance. Even adults play space for adults. This is something that enhances the community and keeps people active at all ages. That brings countless benefits. Reimagining the past, taking old civic infrastructure and buildings and repurposing them for a new future and a new life. These are very interesting projects that can help solve affordable housing issues and meet market demand for cafe space, community library, whatever you want to put into a building like this. It was built with pretty sturdy bones. But it's going to sit empty when the city is faced with $1 billion worth of sewage repairs. There's also new concepts emerging, like vertical gardens on civic buildings that save money by lowering the heating and cooling costs, but also they increase happiness because they're just cool. if you need any proof that these types of approaches to funding civic amenities works, you don't have to look very far, because you're in a building, a state-of-the-art performing arts center that was funded with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contributions from private, corporate, and institutional support. So I think I'm hopeful, as dark as it may seem. The DIY city movement and the civic hackers, makers, and doers, and these new ways of using the internet and social media to raise money for civic projects gives me great hope. I think together we can do this, and we can reimagine and build the city that we want on the budget that we have by opening our minds about how we fund it and who we support. And on that note, as mentioned earlier, Neighborland, I'm happy to announce that Kansas City is getting, as of today, a new civic engagement platform. We're helping Neighborland bring their brilliant platform into the Kansas City area, so look out for that. And we're at Neighborly on the Twitters, and we're also 2 blocks from here, down at Officeport, Kansas City's co-location, co-working space. So if you want to stop by and have some time, come on down and visit. Thank you.